Hello, team. We hope you've enjoyed our Masks Actual Play Relations. We had a fantastic time and are very grateful to Brendan for running this game for us. Gamma Squad and higher level backers on Patreon have had access to the character sheets Brendan created for quite a while now, but as of today, the character sheets and the pre-game letters Brendan wrote for us are available to the public. Link over to www.patreon.com/crashingthemode and check our creator posts. You'll find them there. In addition to individual rewards, Patreon Squad members get early access to new bonus material like this before we make it available to the public. Emily's ClarkCon 2017 panel on teen superhero teams is up now and will be available to the general public next month. You can also find an outtake that Neil edited up from our Masks game right now, and it will also become available next month. Even if you can't support the show financially, and we totally understand that, please link over to the Patreon periodically for convention panels, outtakes, PDFs like these, and more. If you can support the show with a few dollars a month, you can gain access to this material up to a month early. We're grateful for every pledge. Thank you. Lastly, this week is San Diego Comic-Con, and Young Justice will have a panel this coming Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Trust me, I'm pulling out all the stops to do everything I can to make sure I'm in that panel. And barring any issues with that, I'll be live tweeting the event. So whether or not you're on Twitter yourself, you can link to www.twitter.com/theyjfiles and watch for news as it happens. With all that out of the way, let's get on with the show.
Recognized Uncle Walker D01. Recognized Magpie Games D17.
Hello, team. Today in the cave, we have a special discussion session for you. Brendan Conway is the creator of Masks, A New Generation, a role-playing game heavily inspired by Young Justice. He's also the game master of the Actual Play podcast session you likely have just listened to. Brendan, thanks for joining us again for a little post-game chat.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me here.
Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that in our discussion sessions, we draw on anything and everything related to Young Justice, including both seasons of the series so far, the comics, and the video game. If you've not seen, read, or played all the material and are spoiler-wary, consider this your warning. Also, if you haven't listened to the Actual Play podcast event first, go listen to that first, then come listen to the discussion session. We're going to spoil that terribly. And with all of that, let's dive in. So, Brendan, I mentioned a couple things there, mostly just about your game design stuff, but can you tell the world a little bit more about who you are and what you do on Earth Prime here?
Absolutely. So, my name is Brendan Conway, as we've said a couple times. And
remember the name.
Remember that name. And I'm co-owner and lead developer for Magpie Games. And with them, I help to create new games. I rules edit. I help design. I help make sure our books get out the door and all myriad other tasks and under our overarching purview. We and Magpie Games include Mark Diaz Truman, Marissa Kelly, and Sarah Richardson in particular as lead designers. And we have done such things as A Pillion, a game about baby dragons, and Urban Shadows, a game about political urban fantasy horror, and the upcoming project Bluebeard's Bride, which is all about... Yes. I'm excited to get my hands on that book as well.
That one's brutal. Bluebeard's Bride is brutal.
Yep.
Anyway, yeah, in all the good ways.
Yes,
yeah,
in all the good ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so in myriad ways I'm involved with these to differing extents, but Masks is my first lead project where I wrote the game myself, and obviously with tremendous assistance from the rest of the team, and thank goodness for all of them because they are an enormous help, but I was the lead and wrote it and designed it and am still spearheading it.
Yeah, amazing. For those of you who enjoyed this actual play podcast and you maybe have not heard something like this before, I might recommend shows like the One Shot Podcast Network. You've heard James D'Amato, one of the co-founders on our show. Likely Kat Cool, his co-founder of that show, has also been recorded. Hopefully she's been aired by the time this comes out. We'll see. But they do a playthrough of Bluebeard's Bride and some of these other games, and there are definitely other shows out that do this kind of a radio drama / role-playing game presentations that you should definitely check out. So yeah, and clearly we're big fans of masks around the cave. So well played, sir. So when did you first see Young Justice? Did you watch it when it first aired? Did you catch it just on Netflix, DVD? What's the story?
I confess my deep and hidden shame. No, I did not watch it.
You've never seen the show. You've never seen Young
I don't even know who Robin is.
Man, you nailed this game somehow. Good job.
Throwing darts at a dartboard. I watched it on Netflix, and I believe it was as part of trying to investigate this overarching genre. I first ran across it. I'd heard of it previously in some capacity, but I didn't have a clear beat on it, and eventually I encountered the stories about Young Justice was so good and was canceled well before its time and deep tragedy, and went and watched it on Netflix and was like, they are totally right. The stories were 100% accurate.
The hype is real.
Yes, exactly. The hype is real. And it became a cornerstone of masks. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. So that's interesting. So you were already working on the concept of masks before you saw Young Justice, but you do say that Young Justice was a heavy influence on it. I find that interesting.
Yeah, I think I had seen the original Teen Titans cartoon, which was in my head to some extent, prior to all this. And I'm trying to remember the exact chronology, and I apologize, things are a little squishy. But I believe I had read some of Young Avengers, maybe, or in and around that time. I had a lot of the influences of masks running around my head at the same moment that it was crystallized by somebody on social media sharing an image that was taken from the all-new X-Men run by Brian Michael Bendis. And it's an image of X-23, teenage girl clone of Wolverine, kissing the from-the-past younger version of Cyclops. And I'm like, the fact that sentence is as crazy as it is and delightful, like, that's it. That's the thing that I would like to have a game that can repeat, is this ridiculous sentence of a teenaged clone of an existing hero kissing the from-the-past version of another character. Yeah, no, I want that.
My Season 2 co-host, Emily, is a big fan of what we call the smoochies. So, in the show. So, I'm going to talk about Emily a bit because she's played some role-playing games, but she hadn't, none of us, actually, as much as I love masks, I love it because I read the game and I knew what it was going to do. Like, by reading the mechanics, like, you can never tell 100% what a game's going to be like until you actually get it on the table. Right. But when I'm reading the mechanics, and as we talked about in our mechanics episode, I was like, there's no hit points. These playbooks are about story themes. Right? When you take damage, you really take, how do you feel about yourself now that Galactus dropped a planet on your head? It's, like we say, oh yeah, Superboy's invulnerable, but technically so is everybody else on the team. Mm-hmm. Because we don't actually, people get bloodied up and bandaged, but they don't die. So like invulnerability isn't really a thing. It's about how do you feel after you have, run across the country trying to deliver a heart and fail, right? Yep. Like, that's when I was reading the book. I was like, this game, I want to play this game all the time, right? But technically, this is the first time, and I've heard some other actual plays, but this is the first time I'd played the actual game and seen it in action. And it was beyond my expectations even. And so really the idea that Emily, she's played a few role-playing games, but also had not played masks. But there were so many things. If you go back in her interview, she talks about so many things she wanted to see that she didn't get to see because of that 5-year skip.
Right.
Because she was 14 during season 1 and was Robin's age and wanted to grow up with this character and go through the things with this character and was denied that because of the 5-year skip. That this game can help her redo or live through or do something similar, Yep. That's an amazing functionality. And of course, smoochies. Again.
So many smoochies.
Smooches, very important smooches, yeah. So now we know kind of where that came from. Let's take it a step back even farther. When and how did you get involved in game design, period? Like, where did your experience with RPGs start?
Yeah. So I've been playing RPGs for years and years and years and years, since I was like 9 or 10, and I would go to the local gaming store and play with a giant group of D&D players in a situation that trained me well on some of the harshness of games. My favorite story being when I asked to have a silver dagger made, and I got a chunk of silver because apparently I didn't ask for it to be sharp. I just asked for a dagger. It was a good time.
Oh, God. Flashbacks to first edition in the 80s.
Yep, good times. So that's how I cut my teeth. That's what I came up through, and I've been playing through high school into college. And eventually I started getting into more of the quote-unquote indie game, storytelling-ish games. Fate, and eventually when it came out, Apocalypse World occupied an enormous amount of my attention, interest, and time. And I tinkered and played around and made up stuff myself the whole time. But when I really started getting involved with design stuff was around when I created this bonkers magical item for Dungeon World. Dungeon World being the Dungeons & Dragons-ish version of Apocalypse World. And it was the Angel Bone Blade, and it was made from the bones of angels, as the name might suggest. And it was this,
name's really on the nose there.
it's pretty clear. And it was like my version of Fantasy to 11, and this sword will end worlds, and that kind of madness. And after writing that helped me to connect with other people, including Mark Diaz Truman, with whom I would write my first real book, The Last Days of Anglekite, which was like a campaign setting for Dungeon World. Fantasy
nice.
Turned up to 11. And that, coupled with work at the same time with Mark on the Firefly RPG, on their sort of GM elements, that was how I started getting into all of this madness.
Nice. So Dungeon World isn't, well, I guess maybe I'm old, but Dungeon World isn't that old, right? So it's gone through 2 editions? Has it done 2 editions? 3 editions? 2 editions? 1 edition?
Dungeon World, I believe, has had a single edition so far. And I think it came out, and this is me pulling the number out of my head, hoping I'm anywhere close to right, but I think 2011, 12?
Okay.
So it's, at this point, it's been around for a while.
Okay, so that's 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's ancient. That's really just, dinosauric. And, I mean, as far as the Apocalypse World games go, it's actually one of the earliest. And so, like, in this expanse of new games coming out all the time, it is one of the venerable ancestors as far as we get. And it was, again, instrumental, great for me to have fun with, and great for me to design all 3 Chaos Worlds, which were my first real, like, me writing projects.
Gotcha. Okay, so now I want you to take both of those stories and slam them together. So how did your role-playing game situation, what was the evolution of your role-playing game design writing leading to Masks? What was the deep cycle? How do you feel about roll against take a powerful blow? And how do you feel about this whole thing?
I mark insecure. So the story of Masks really did begin with that specific image that I called out earlier. And at the time, all it was there's another Powered by the Apocalypse game called Monster Hearts, which is all
Monster
about
Hearts
playing.
Is great.
It's so good. And it perfectly captures like Vampire Diaries or Twilight or pieces of Buffy, and it's really good at hitting those notes. And so it had the teen romance drama, it had all of that hyper emotional stuff that that picture brought up for me in a superhero context. And it started off with people talking about the name Mutant Hearts, referring to like X-Men, but in the same vein.
Yeah.
And so that was where I started noodling around on it, was like, Mutant Hearts would be so cool. Is there a way just to make Monster Hearts simply change, not that big of a shift, to then be able to play X-Men in that context?
So your first thing was trying to just hack Monster Hearts into a superhero like template that you could slap on Monster Hearts?
Exactly. That was the initial thought so that I wouldn't have to do a tremendous amount of work. This thought was a huge failure, as is evidenced
Yeah, you
by
failed.
the book.
You failed that, by the way.
Yes, big time.
Well played.
that did not work out. Well, and it speaks to how good Mutant Hearts is. Mutant Hearts. How good Monster Hearts is. Monster Hearts, by the way, by Avery Alder, brilliant designer. And part of why Monster Hearts is so good at what it is because it is very specific. It hits what it is on the nose, and it's really hard to make the pieces of Monster Hearts easily shift into other genres. Like, you can probably make it work at the table, there's ways to get around it, but it's always going to be a little bit not quite right because it is so perfect for what it is. So over time, it was just a little bit of that, well, I can't stop, I can't let it down, I want to keep noodling on it, that kept me working on it, changing it. And eventually I had the idea of your shifting labels representing how you see yourself, representing being this mutable young hero, and the idea that if you would eventually grow up and that's when your labels would be set in stone. That's when you know who you are and these questions go away.
I never thought about that, actually. So the idea of the changing... just as a quick aside, if some of these phrases we're using or terms or things are unfamiliar to you because you've listened straight to this discussion session, go and listen to the introductory episode before our actual play, and we go into detail about what we're talking about here. But we did that so we don't have to do that here. This idea that I love that concept. So you start off as McGann with your freak at 3 and your mundane at -2. But by the time she becomes an adult and becomes an adult hero, maybe those are balanced out more, or whatever that happens to be, or maybe they're really not. Like maybe she believes as an adult that she is a freak and that she has accepted the fact that she is bizarre and outside of human nature, and that's okay. She just is going to accept herself that way. Oh, man, I love that.
It's part of the like... Look, as a comic book fan, there's tremendous variety out there. There absolutely are stories about adult heroes who are still changing how they see themselves. But in the context of a Masks, the idea that the adults are fairly clear on who they are. Batman knows he's a danger. He's accepted he's a danger. That's how he presents himself. That's how he is. That's how he thinks. That ain't changing. It gives these walls for the young heroes to bounce off of. And that's the change that I see them going through, is that when they get set in stone like the adults, that they're, we love the characters, but they're not Masks characters anymore. They've moved past it. They've graduated. They should become NPCs at that stage.
Yeah. And actually, that's really interesting. One of our first discussion sessions back in, I think it was our second discussion session, was with Ishan Sherwood from the amazing Total Party Thrill podcast. We were talking about diversity in storytelling, but we also talked about, I brought up the idea that from a role-playing game perspective, the Justice League in Young Justice are NPCs. They're all support, and NPCs, for those who may not know, is non-player character. So a character that the person who's running the game is running, not a main player-driven character. It's also basically your supporting cast character from a TV show or a movie or whatever it happens to be. And yeah, he was like, oh God, yeah, you're right. Like, how interesting is it that Superman and Batman are not your main focus? They're heavily involved, yet somehow not your main focus of what you're telling, right?
Yep. And the pattern of Young Justice is the pattern that I pulled for Masks and that I really want for Masks, which is UPCs, player characters, the main characters, the ones being played by the people at the table. They go out and they do the stuff, and they do cool stuff, and we tell their stories. Then they come back to some extent, or they return to the Watchtower, or meet back up with the older heroes. And the older heroes will judge them, and will comment on their failures, and will comment on their successes, too, but often are fairly critical.
Of course.
And that specific role, realizing that in this context, Superman shouldn't be a main character. He should be the commentator upon how you act, and in some ways a force of resistance that says, you didn't do it right because you didn't do it the way I would have done it.
Right.
And it gives you the opportunity to push back against that and say, well, the way you would have done it, Superman, is dumb.
Right. Well, there's the scene at the very beginning of Schooled, which I think is genius, episode 5, where Superboy's trying to help. Like he's still in that phase where he's trying to decide, am I a weapon or a hero? Mm-hmm. Right? And we know he's deep in that because he just came out of the pod not weeks before. And there's something happens to a suspension bridge. He's jumping on the suspension bridge. He grabs a school bus full of kids. And there's no doubt about whether or not the school bus full of kids needs to be saved. I would like to point that out. And then, of course, Superman's like, oh, he's trying to support the bridge and do all that kind of stuff. And Connor jumping on the bridge is causing more instability. So they're going toe-to-toe. And I see this as like a perfect Masks scene. You're not rolling dice to see whether or not you save the kids. You're having this psychological combat, combat's not the right word, conflict, I guess, with Superboy saying, like, please help me. Like, you're criticizing me, but I'm asking you for help. I want to be you. Teach me how to be a hero. And when Superman turns around and leaves, the rest of the episode, Connor's like, well, I guess if I can't be a hero, I'm going to be a weapon and screw you all. Right?
Yep.
I have nothing. I'm just going to dive into the other end. He just doesn't see that middle ground yet.
Yep. And that's his danger shifting up.
Right. That's what I was going to ask you. Like, when you look at scenes, because I'm starting to do this now that I have more experience with masks, but like when I see scenes like that in a show like Wolverine and the X-Men, which is a brilliant Marvel, I'm not big on Marvel's animation series, really. Wolverine and the X-Men is right up there with Young Justice in quality.
Absolutely.
It is a brilliant show. So I'm looking at that, and I'm looking at Young Justice, or even something else. Like, I was watching Ben 10 with my kids, and I've never seen it before. And I just instinctively started looking at scenes like, yeah, okay, so he throws fire, he's a fire alien, and that kind of stuff. But that's not the interesting thing that's happening. The interesting thing that's happening is he started a forest fire, and he doesn't know how to stop it because he doesn't know his powers, and his grandfather and his cousin are there, and he and his cousin are going at it. Like, that's the drama. That's the focus.
Right.
Do you break a scene down? How would you break the scene down, that scene in Schooled, in like a Masks dynamic?
Yeah. I mean, and I totally agree. That specific scene, especially, is the kind that I would want Masks to work perfectly for. So I have the move in Masks called Defend Someone. And so probably in that moment, like, I would see it as, like, as GM would say, great, so we're in this situation, Superman's there, but things are a little bit out of control because so much is happening, and then you show up, Connor, what do you do? And Connor says, I go and save the bus, and I hop as quickly as I can across the bridge to go and get to the bus. And I'm like, cool, so the hopping might be unleash your powers. Okay. And with that, Connor gets a 7 and 9. And so that means that mixed result of he gets what he wants, he gets to the bus quickly before it falls, but it's unstable or temporary. So I, the GM, say, yeah, your hops are making the entire bridge vibrate more. You're making this way harder. The whole thing is falling apart. And that bus is about to fall. And Connor says, well, I grab the bus and I prevent it from falling off the side. And I say, great, so that's defend. You're defending the people in the bus.
I see. Yeah.
What would be interesting in that moment, obviously we don't know what the roll was, but if you conceive of that as a miss, as a 6 or lower, because it's easy to think of that and be like, you failed. Connor did not fail the bus plummets off the side. But that's not really exactly how the misses work, because they don't have to be failure. So instead, Connor goes to save the bus and finds out it wasn't needed, finds out that Superman's already got it and got it better than Connor ever could as he flies up like an ascendant god holding the bus. And that just makes Connor feel worthless. And so then I, the GM, am going to say to Connor, go ahead and mark insecure there, buddy.
Yeah, insecure is the condition that you feel after the scene. And the other thing that's interesting, we did not point out, unfortunately, which I think is a huge and awesome mechanic in Powered by the Apocalypse games, is the concept of failing forward, which is that 6 or less roll gives that narrative control to the game master to mess with you in great dramatic ways. But you also basically gain what would be called experience points in some other game. In this case, you call it potential, right?
Yes.
And so it's this idea that's always bugged me for 40 years in role-playing games, the idea that we don't learn from succeeding. We learn from mistakes, which then later get us to the point where we can succeed because we've screwed it up a bunch of times. So the idea that when you roll a 6, it sucks because you quote unquote miss, but it's kind of nice because you also get potential. You like learn from that mistake. And I can see Connor, even though he comes away from that deciding, well, I guess I can't be a hero because Superman doesn't think I'm good enough or whatever, so I guess I'm going to be the weapon. Even though he doesn't make a good decision there, it's a seed planted of potential for the change that comes later. And I just love that you have a mechanic that echoes that. It's a little bit of game design genius, in my opinion.
Giving credit where it's due, within the Powered by the Apocalypse framework, that was Dungeon World that did that first, with you get your experience point on a miss. But absolutely, like the whole reason it's in there is for this purpose of Masks is a game where these characters would learn through failure. You're young, you're not the top of your game. Every time you screw up is a moment that you will take forward and will push you towards becoming whatever the ultimate version of you is.
Yeah. And I appreciate you giving credit where credit's due, for sure. The idea that you've used that here and reflected that in the storytelling so well, in addition to all the other mechanics, it's not just a nice mechanical verisimilitude reflection of how our psychology works. From a game-playing standpoint, it's really nice to take the sting off of a miss, you know? To just be like, right? You're like, oh, I missed. Oh, but I get a potential. Okay. And then it puts you in a mindset of like, what does that mean? Like, how did this missing this situation, what did I learn or not learn yet? I love that it puts your head in that space. It's nice.
And the gearhead part of it, as the designer playing with mechanics part of it, is if I give you this little nugget, this cookie, every time you miss, I can actually get you to use your labels that are very low. I can get you to stop avoiding some of these things where you know you're going to fail. If McGann starts off with a +3 freak and a -2 mundane, then it's perfectly reasonable for her player to immediately be like, I don't want to comfort or support anybody because I'm just going to screw that up. I'm going to get a 6 or lower. But now you are guaranteed a potential for that miss, plus hopefully like the fiction's going to be really cool and interesting and fun and exciting. So between those things, you now not only focus on what you're actually good at, you are comfortable doing everything across the board.
Right. And again, that's just a reflection of psychology of how the human mind works. This idea that, okay, so McGann thinks that she's not normal enough to be able to help, right? I don't know how to comfort you. Or I might know, but I'm not confident in my ability to do that for you. But if you don't participate in life, you can't learn to get better at that thing, right? Yep. And I'm a big proponent of playing games with kids. And this is the reason. These are the things, like not just the kicking down the doors and the beating up orcs and fighting dragons and the tactics and the teamwork. Those are great for D&D. There's definitely a place for that. But this summer, my amazing nephew is coming out to visit me, and I am going to be setting up probably a weekly, if not more, Masks game because he's visiting us for a good month. And so I'm hoping he's interested in playing, and being 12, I think this is great. He will have the freedom of his imagination to talk about whatever powers he wants, and we don't need to go through all that math of champions, even though I'm a huge Champions fan. But he can just describe what he wants without needing to be too buried in mechanics for a role-playing game. And then when you say to someone like, it's like, okay, we're done with this fight. How do I heal? It's like, well, you can do this thing, or one of your teammates can comfort you. How are you going to comfort you? Starts to train younger minds about these kinds of socio-emotional concepts. I may be getting a little deeper maybe than intended, but this is a tool that I will be using with my kids, this kind of mechanic. Plus,
thank you.
Smoochies and superheroes. Can't get much better than that.
That is super exciting for me to hear about. Yeah, I would probably be giving myself too much credit to say that that is a thing that was utterly in my mind, more than the fact that I wanted people at the table not to just be these grim balls of grim angst, because it is crucial. It's absolutely crucial in Young Justice that everybody cares and about each other, and they care about this unit, and they're all here together. And I want just the key thing for me was short-circuiting a natural tendency to be I get all sad, I get upset, and I get inside my own head, and all of these characters might do that at the same time. And having moves like Comfort or Support helps clue you in early to saying, no, you're in this together. Help each other out.
Yeah.
Focus on trying to assist each other and make each other feel better. And I love the idea that works across the board for adults and kids, getting them to actually help each other out.
Yeah, I love it. It's fantastic. So, all right, so let's talk a little bit more specifically about this game. So, the way we set this game up, just so people can know where my headspace was at, this is the second time I've used the word headspace, and the reason is because there's another Powered by the Apocalypse game by the genius Mark Richardson called Headspace, which I absolutely love, and for some reason I can't get it out of my head right now. So what we did was we knew we wanted to run this game because Caleb and I are both so role-playing game focused. When we started the podcast, of course we were thinking about doing an actual play, and of course first thing we thought of was masks. But how do you run games like this, like such, pardon the phrase, but like legacy characters, this big mechanics? Like, do we run it in Champions and have it be crunchy? And, what do we do, right? So there's another podcast called the Game Masters Showcase. I was invited on by DM Mitch, who is a fantastic guy and a good friend. He wanted to run a predicted story of Star Wars Episode 8 and have us play a game of Edge of the Empire, Fantasy Flight Games Edge of the Empire, and see if we could predict what happened in Episode 8. And of course, he asked me to run it, and I was like, that sounds like a lot of stress. What he came up with was the idea of, okay, all the players are going to send me, as the game master, ideas. 3 to 5 ideas. It could be anything simple, like, I just want to see Ben Kenobi show up in this, like his spirit ghost or whatever. Or I want to see, Finn and Poe kiss, whatever. Something that you wanted to see. Or a storyline, And what that did was it gave me a stack of ideas. And it did two things. One, it gave me ideas of what kind of adventure to run. But the second thing that it did, which was much more subtle, was it told me what kind of game my players wanted to play. Right? If they'd all sent me political intrigue, things about the Republic and that kind of stuff, it would have been a very different game, right? But that would also have told me, like, oh, man, everybody's interested in politics? Okay, I guess I better focus that. And it really helped to draw people in. So I blatantly stole DM Mitch's idea for this game and had all of our players send you a bunch of ideas. And can you talk about that process? Like, how was it to get those? And we didn't tell each other what those ideas were. And you were allowed to mix and match the ones that you liked so that none of us knew exactly what was going to happen, but we all had a say in what was going to happen. Can you talk about that process for you as a game master?
Absolutely. So the big thing that immediately occurs to me that helped me do is focus in on the specific elements of the ridiculous tapestry of comic books of the DC universe of Young Justice to say, this is what we're going to talk about. This is what we're going to pay attention to. Because it's a setting where we could do aliens, we could do robots, we could do wizards. There's so many different ways you can go with it that the options you gave me were my first clue of like, aha, this sort of links up here. Atlantis is here and here, so we can do Atlantis. Very cool. Okay. And match sort of connects here and here. Cool. So we're going to focus on that piece. Probably not going to talk about, say, Vandal Savage. Probably not going to deal with Bialia. We're not going to deal with, like, Queen Bee, because those things don't really show up here in any way. And it just did that immediate narrowing down of, you're invested in these elements, so I'm guaranteed by putting them out here, you will be bought in, because you've told me that you're going to be bought in, which is great. And I can stop trying to think of the whole thing and be like, well, I could do anything, so what do I even do? And instead I got to be clear about what fit with the pieces that I was given. Yeah. The process I used, the one thing I did was just drawing those connections of being like, this piece and this piece, they're linked. This piece and this piece, they're linked. Cool. So that's what I'm going to focus on. Anywhere I saw something reflected across multiple lists, that was where I sort of homed in on. And some of those connections were tenuous. Trip to Atlantis and graduation is tenuous. But as soon as something came to my head and I was like, oh, well, you would be going to Atlantis as your post-graduation celebration. Cool. That was the connection I needed, and suddenly it fit together.
Can you, I don't know if you have this in front of you, but can you tell us which suggestions you drew off of to put these together?
Sure.
So people can see how you tweaked them a little bit? Did I suggest Atlantis? I probably did. But
I think you did. Let me go see if I can find that. I think I put them all into the same document just to make sure. I had such suggestions as Match has gone missing and Luthor approaches the team to apprehend him. What are they going to do? Not help and let an insane Kryptonian go on a rampage? Also, did Connor ever mention Match to the others? Whoops. That was one specific one that I really focused on. That was from Ishan.
Okay.
Along with Connor begins to suspect McGann is using her powers in questionable ways.
Oh, interesting.
So like that one was easy, especially because that's very character focused and didn't require bringing in anything else.
Yeah.
And Match is one of the pieces that I glommed onto in particular because in some ways that sentence, what are they going to do? Not help and let an insane Kryptonian go on a rampage, got me.
Yeah.
Let's see. I had from Darcy, I had such things as Calder studies Black Manta's habits and gets a little too into character for a while, starts to lose himself in preparing to pretend to go bad guy. And that was the kind of thing that started pointing me at Atlantis, pointing me at Black Manta. In original notes, I had stuff in there that maybe Black Manta was involved with this more. Maybe Black Manta was actually equipping these Aqua matches. And so I pulled from that to help build up the overarching setup.
Right, because actually Aqualad didn't know at the time of our game that he was Black Manta's son. But she was saying, like, maybe it's his research is planting seeds or making him question things. That's interesting.
Exactly. And that's where I got into that. A specific decision I made at one point was what playbook each character would be. And a lot of these actually helped with that side of it as well, where I could have done Aqualad as an outsider. And there's a piece of him where it's like, he doesn't get these Earth people and graduation, and he's an Atlantean.
Oh, yeah,
none of this makes as much sense. But the focus upon the idea of him becoming Black Manta, where we all know Black Manta is his father, that's actually a very legacy-style issue, where he's got a family of people above him, all of whom are pointing at things he should be, and one piece of that is Aquaman himself, one piece of that is Black Manta, one piece of that you could say is Queen Mira. In the same legacy, you could interpret Tula as being in the same legacy, and Garth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so suddenly saying this emphasis upon Black Manta actually allowed me to, perhaps even more importantly than saying what was going on, say Aqualad should be a legacy.
Yeah.
Because dealing with these people and these different paths is a very legacy thing.
Right. So what other things, what did you take of mine? I don't remember. Oh, one of the ones I sent was that Superman at some point has to figure out Connor's other father is Lex. But we've never seen that reveal. And I was like, oh, I want to see how that goes. The second thing, to nobody's surprise, I do remember was that I wanted to play through some kind of development of Robin making a decision finally about what he's going to grow up to be. Even though he decides that he doesn't want to be Batman, he still has no clue what that looks like. Now it's even worse because he's off the rails and has no view of his future. I wanted to play through that a little bit. I wanted to see Zatanna and Robin going on a date. And I know that Emily sent you something about the graduation because she was so bummed that she didn't get like a prom episode or a graduation episode of the show. And she was like, I don't think anybody else wants to play that. And I'm like, do not make the decision for Brandon for him. Send him what you want to see, and then we'll all love it. It'll be great.
Yep.
So,
and the graduation piece was crucial, again, at like just helping set it up as graduation connected to Atlantis. Cool. So here's how we can flow from that, because it made perfect sense to me that these guys would all be like, let's go to Atlantis, this magical undersea city, as our way of celebrating this moment. Because as far as I can recall within the actual show, The only time we saw Atlantis in season 1 was when Aqualad went. Technically, the rest of the team didn't go.
That's true. In the comics, there's an episode in the comics where McGann and Connor both join Aqualad for an episode, for a comic, but that's it. I don't think we see anybody else go.
And so there was this hole there of like, well, of course this team, Wally especially, would want to see this magical undersea city. Of course. And it just fit as an easy way to get into this, to hit these multiple notes, to have the graduation as a great real-life thing that would prompt some drama, coupled with the superhuman part of going to Atlantis, and then easily, of course, when you get to Atlantis, it's under attack, because you can't ever have nice things.
No, of course. So speaking of that first bit, I think it's very key. You started us in what we call, I would call it an in media res. And in this case, instead of an in media res start, for those who don't know, in media res means that you're starting in the action. So, Princess Leia's ship is being shot at by a Star Destroyer and you don't know what's happening because you've never seen this universe before. That's in media res. There is an actual play D&D 5e all-aquatic game that I ran recently that should hopefully be airing soon for Tabletop Babble, and I started in media res in a combat, right? Mm-hmm. You basically start us in media res, but it's in media res of all of us being at each other's, I wouldn't say at each other's throats, but we're all having psychological issues with one another. It's almost like starting in the middle of a psychological combat or emotional turmoil. And the fact that you chose a graduation is such a great, like, emotional, poignant moment in lives, particularly Megan, that it really put this great, like, highlighter right across all the problems that were happening. And I think that's it's a great lesson to learn for any game, really, starting games with that kind of thing. Can you speak to that a bit?
Absolutely. The in-book advice for if you are starting a campaign of masks and if you're doing a one-shot game of masks is start off with a fight and basically jump in with that fight right there at the very beginning. And, Photovore is stomping down the street, and how do you guys show up and stop him? Right. And the reason being, a fight is sort of the spark that then will set the entire engine of masks going. People take conditions, stuff happens, heroes can then judge you for your actions or inaction during the fight, and so on and so forth. So either you're playing a one-shot and it's really satisfying to just have a cool fight and then some argument afterward, or it's a great way to set off the campaign. For this specific scenario, though, one of the things I got to do that I don't normally get to do is essentially treat it as in the middle of a campaign. The game we played is closer to a mid-campaign session than it was actually the start of a whole new campaign, because everybody is familiar with these characters, because I can throw out such things as saying, yeah, right now, McGann is in the middle of getting all of her powers and has hurt Connor. And we're all on the same page because everybody in this game was amazing. And I don't have to worry about that pump being primed as much the way that I might for a regular Masks game, where we can't jump straight to that because we don't know these characters yet. They're brand new characters. We've never actually played them before. So here, my big thing was the advantage of getting to draw on the history, draw on our shared conception of these characters, and jump us into a place where essentially you can imagine prior episodes had occurred. The big thing here having been Connor and Calder broke into LexCorp, stole two steal files about Connor's creation, and wound up getting caught or having significant difficulty. They had to call Robin for help, and Robin called Batman because they're in deep trouble. Of course you call Batman at that stage. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine that was like a prior episode / that was a prior game, a prior session of Masks. Mm-hmm. And this is dealing with the aftermath of that. So for me, that was in my head the whole time. So the long and short of it is I ignore the advice that I give in my own book, and I cheated by virtue of this being the Young Justice characters. If we had been making brand new characters, I probably wouldn't have done what we did, because I would have wanted to know who they are. I would have wanted you to tell me who they are. But since we all knew these characters, and you had essentially told me what you were interested in thanks to these suggestions, I felt way more comfortable being like, let's start it as if we have played previous sessions and just jump right into what amounts to our 5th or 6th session of a campaign.
Right. And, I mean, you knew the characters so well that everything that you gave us felt very genuine, you know, to the character. There wasn't anything out of context. Like, I played with, like, would Robin really call Batman? So I don't know, but what I thought was, as a player, you want my character to have called Batman. So instead of questioning that decision of whether I called or not, instead I thought, okay, what reason would he have to be forced to call Batman? Which is Connor, in my head anyway. I don't know if this is the way you set it up, but my headcanon was Connor and Calder were in deep and it was getting bad, and they called Robin to say, please hack the security. And Robin's like, first of all, I'm at school or whatever. And, you know, second of all, it's LexCorp. I can't mobile go into this thing to save your guys' life. I literally can't do it. If you would have told me ahead of time, I could have been there, or I could have given you a flash drive to be able to hack into something, but you didn't do any of that, and now I'm forced to call Batman, which I don't ever want to have to do, right?
Yep.
And so, like I said, instead of saying no to you about that decision, I instead said yes, and how is this a deeper situation, and how does it play into the emotional punch? And it set Connor and I up in a really interesting dynamic right from the get-go. And of course, Ishan's a fantastic role player, so
absolutely,
I think our dynamic was really cool in the way that you set that up. So speaking of that, let's talk about the characters now just a little bit. So the characters from your playbooks, I'm going to give you as a reader of the game's perspective. When I think of the characters, I think, okay, the Bull, all right, that's Connor, right? The legacy character, okay, that's Kid Flash. You know, McGann's the outsider, right? That kind of thing. But though some of the characters you created at this time frame in their evolution, like Connor was the Bull and Robin was the protege. Did I say legacy for Kid Flash? But the protege for Robin. You've got Wally is not the legacy character. Wally's the beacon in this. McGann was not the outsider. She's a Nova. And then Aqualad was a legacy character, which makes sense for him, though there are other playbooks that could have worked for him as well.
Right.
Can you talk about why you chose to do the things that you did? And then also, can you talk about how, because there's a way to either change playbooks or add things from other playbooks into characters as they evolve. Can you talk about both of those things a bit?
Absolutely. So we talked a whole bunch about the playbooks and about how the playbooks are defined by what story issue you're dealing with. And my choices for each character and which playbook was used for them came from this combination of what you all sent to me and signaled you were interested in dealing with, my knowledge of the characters and the transition that they're going through, and which playbooks best suited the specific needs of this session. So, for example, like Wally, on the surface, absolutely appears to be a legacy because he's got all of this family of Flashes above and around him, and he's going to be dealing with that. But as I was going into it, one piece that came out was, well, how easy is it actually going to be to have any interaction with any of these other Flashes? Especially if we've got Batman running around, especially if we're in Atlantis. Is it actually going to come up that there are these other Flashes? And so
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Part of that said to me then, that may not be the right move here. And the Beacon in particular is a playbook that is all about being excited, being super happy and joyful, and you're one of the only ones who's really here just because being a superhero is awesome. And and you want to be this. And so for the sake of this specific game, that seemed to hit a lot of classically Wally kind of notes, and also be a different note than a lot of the other characters were hitting. So it made sense to me in that moment to be like, cool, the powers don't sync up. The Beacon is usually supposed to be someone who kind of doesn't have a huge justification for being here. The drama of the Beacon comes from other people looking at you and saying, you're a kid with a bow. You're a kid with a bow. You're gonna die if you stay here. Please stop, please. But it worked ultimately because the actual overarching thing here was Wally was just excited. Wally was happy And that managed to play into the overall combination of characters with everybody else being so much inside their own heads and so focused on their own issues that Wally got to be this perfect, like, maybe we should stop being so grim and serious, maybe, kind of.
Yeah.
It's possible to be happy.
And Neil, shout out to Neil. Who nailed Wally. We needed, at first I wasn't sure if Neil was going to be able to join us because he works a normal schedule as opposed to me. And I'm so glad he made it because we needed Wally so badly, and he nailed Wally.
Yep.
So that's great. And with Miss Martian, you have her, instead of the outsider, you have her as a Nova. And so the outsider, I guess I kind of see that because it doesn't really fit. She's starting to fit in and feel better about her position at the end of season 1. So can you talk about what is the Nova and why that playbook?
Yeah, the big thing for me with Miss Martian is I consider season 1 to be the end of her as an outsider. And you mentioned this a little bit before. Masks provides mechanics that allow you to eventually advance and change your playbook. So at a certain point in time, you've gotten enough advancements that you can actually check one off and switch to a different playbook, and that is your chance to really signal what my character's story is about has changed. I'm now about a completely different issue. Between seasons 1 and 2, I feel pretty strongly that Miss Martian in season 1 is an outsider. What it's about is she's not from here, she doesn't quite get how this place works, she's trying to fit in and having a hard time, and ultimately she's this white Martian creature that doesn't look at all like what she has made herself look like. And does that actually matter? She's dealing with all of these issues of fitting in, which is outsider stuff.
Right.
But then in season 2, she's dealing with a completely different set of issues because she does fit in by that point. Instead, the issues she's facing are her powers are out of control. And she's too powerful. She's too capable of just making things happen and doing whatever she wants to do, and she doesn't think about consequences. Those are Nova playbook issues, where the Nova playbook, the quintessential example will always be Jean Grey Phoenix, will always be like this font of power without restraint, or maybe without enough restraint is a better way to put it. And so that was a decision of, she's done with season 1, so I think she's done with the outsider arc. It will always be a part of her. In Mask's terminology, she'll always have those moves. She'll always have some of those pieces left over. But she's a Nova now, and the things that she's dealing with have to do more with her powers getting out of control than with being not of here and not getting it.
Yeah. No, all that makes perfect sense. So the mechanics a little bit of how you change playbooks. But the idea that, so now that she's a Nova, what carries over? Are there any, like, her powers are the same, or similar. It's just how they express themselves are different. But are there particular mechanics that carry over from the previous playbook that affect things? Or do you just start over from scratch?
The usual rule, which is rather soft and fudgy so we can adjust it, but it's that you lose whatever it makes sense you lose and you keep whatever it makes sense you keep.
Okay.
And in game terms, that means I, as a GM, when you transition from one playbook to another, I'm going to really ask you. So, Robin, you used to be a protege, and you have a couple of these moves and powers here that have to do with your close bond with Batman. But you're not a protege anymore. You just turned into, gonna pick one. Let's just say you turned into a bull. Let's say that we're interpreting Nightwing as a bull. So do you really get to keep these things? Is your relationship with Batman severed? And maybe you say to me, no, I still talk to Batman. He's still an important mentor in my life. We're still connected. Cool. So then you keep those moves because it makes sense. It's still a part of your character's story. But also you might say to me, yeah, no, I'm done with him. We don't talk anymore. And at which point I'm going to say, great. So those are gone because it does not make sense for you to keep those. So for McGann specifically, she might have had some of these moves that give her, for instance, I have a move of Kirby Craft, and Kirby Craft is specifically named for Jack Kirby, and it's supposed to give you your crazy weird alien spaceship, so that any given outsider can have their own bioship, essentially. Obviously, Miss Martian kept her bioship between the two seasons, because why wouldn't she? And so that would be the kind of thing where I, as a GM, would say, So would you keep your bioship? Is there any reason that would go away? No. Okay, cool. So you keep that move. Absolutely. That's an outsider move, but you hold on to it as you become a Nova.
So all that makes a lot of sense. Like, I mean, I love the idea that basically it's what we call in the industry the rule of cool, you know? Like, whatever the mechanics are, you know, make it so that it's fun and you guys are having a good time as much as you can without, you know, breaking the game. And in this case, it's like, you know, keep what makes sense. Don't keep what doesn't make sense. It's kind of rule of cooling it, you know, and I really like that idea.
Yep.
And the fact that you can change the story that you're telling without changing the character, you know, itself. So with McGann, you picked a Nova. With Kid Flash, a Beacon. Makes perfect sense. And then you discussed a little earlier, it might have been in the pre-discussion about Aqualad and why you chose a Legacy versus, which seems like kind of obvious, but is there, what other playbooks might you use for, let's say, Calder? What other playbooks could you use based on the story that you've seen of him?
Sure. So actually, Aqualad is a little bit of a tough one, to be honest, because his story can fit into multiple of the playbooks and also is not so clearly one over the others. Like, we have Zero Question Miss Martian in Season 1 as an outsider, or at least I have Zero Question. But Calder could be interpreted from a couple different viewpoints, and I sort of feel sometimes like it changes from episode to episode. So there's a version of Calder who is actually a protege, where the emphasis is not on his relationship to an overarching legacy, it's on his relationship with Aquaman specifically.
I see. Right.
And I feel like that's a version that could work. There's a version that says he's an outsider, where he does not get these surface dweller things. That comes up less often. I get less of a vibe of him not getting it. But it's still there. He doesn't participate in school, and it's noteworthy that he doesn't participate in school, and he doesn't do a lot of the mundane stuff we see the rest of everybody doing.
Right. In fact, he had, based on his history, he had 2 years of mandatory military service at the age of 12.
Exactly.
Okay, that's going to make you feel a little out of the range.
Yep. And to that point, it's not one of the core playbooks, but another option would be to use a playbook like The Soldier, where we are coming up with these limited edition playbooks that are a little bit more hyper-focused. And so one of those is The Soldier, and the emphasis is you are the servant of an organization. It's a little bit like you're a young Captain America, and there might be a way to make that make sense for him with his devotion to purpose, his sort of seriousness.
Yeah, the one that I was just thinking of myself that just popped into my head was the Janus actually works as well, particularly in Downtime, where he's trying to deal with, am I from the surface? Am I going to be on the surface? Am I going to be at home? Like, it's a very, that episode specifically is very focused on that Janus kind of concepts, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so interesting. Now, the one character that you did not make for us, because we didn't have a sixth player, was Artemis. So can you talk about Artemis a little bit and how you think some of her characterizations could be interpreted in the playbooks?
Sure. So Artemis is kind of a little bit where my own heart lies as well. And I have a thing for characters with bows. It's a problem.
Me too, actually. I love the archers. I'm a big fan of the archers. I've had multiple champions characters and rangers that follow that kind of magical arrow.
They're the best.
Themes. They're the best.
So it's important to me that like there's a way to do that. And what complicates Artemis in particular is she could be a beacon. You could hit those notes, especially because the beacon, as I said, is supposed to have powers that lead you to question whether they really belong here. There's that one episode, and I can't remember the title, I apologize, but it's when she and Robin show up and the Reds have attacked the cave.
Homefront is the name of the episode. Yeah.
She and Robin are like completely outmatched, and she's freaking out as they're trying to crawl around and escape, and she's like, they took down our biggest guns, and we're all that's left, and you think we can save it? And that is her as a beacon to a T. This like, I am completely outclassed, and yet I'm gonna win the day.
So when you named this particular playbook is interesting to me. When I think beacon of light and joy, like Wally, loving being a superhero, and everybody should just love being a superhero. But Artemis is not like that, and I would not see her necessarily as a beacon based on the definition I just gave. But you did mention earlier that these playbooks have dichotomies, right? And the and the ability scores have like everything is a dichotomy. Can you talk about that with this in relation to the beacon? And
yeah, absolutely. All of the playbooks have levels of variation within them. I'm not probably going to encourage you to play a beacon who's a lighthearted demigod, because that's not really hitting the beacon's notes that much in the end. The fact that you have that much power undermines it. But it's perfectly within the realm of the beacon to say the two core pieces are your excitement to be here, your interest in doing this, not necessarily out of some desire to right a deep wrong or get vengeance or some noble heroic onus upon your soul. You're here because it's kind of awesome and you kind of love it and it makes you feel really good.
Nice. Okay.
And the fact that you have no powers and are kind of outclassed by everybody around you. So you can push on each of those poles and find more space probably in between them than just those two poles and still be a beacon and still have it make sense. So for Artemis, for example, I agree. I usually think of beacons as very light characters, but it makes sense to me that Artemis is partly there because this feels good, because of all of the stuff that comes down from her family, makes her feel bad, makes her feel tarnished, but putting on this costume, saving people, makes her feel good. And she's doing this because it's awesome.
Yeah.
And it's exciting.
I get that.
And with all of them, you can sort of pinpoint these couple of places where you might push or pull on it. Like, for instance, I think about the Delinquent is one of the... It's one of the most surface level, it seems, of the playbooks. The Delinquent is sort of the little troublemaker, the one who loves attention. I think, actually, of Impulse maybe a Delinquent.
That makes sense, yeah.
You care about other people paying attention to you as you cause mischief and antics. And so on its surface level, it feels like, yeah, you're just that kid, you're just an annoying little jerk. But underneath that is this layer of, but actually you care deeply about this team because they're your audience. And you can push and pull on both of those sides. Again, finding your space between being sort of just the rebel and the mischief maker and finding the one who, actually, I really care about these guys. They're my bros. I need them because that's how I get my good feels about myself, too. Yeah.
Interesting. All right, so now we've gone over some of the characterizations, like how you interpreted these characters, and maybe how our listeners can interpret these characters in their own ways. Like, there's no right way necessarily. Right. Like, it's what story do you want to tell, and how do you want to tell it, and the idea that your superpowers are what you want them to be, but kind of how they fit into the storyline
exactly
is more important. So let's jump back to the game for a minute. Do you have any favorite, and of course I think you do, favorite moments from the game? Did anything surprise you? Like, the Powered by the Apocalypse games are a little open and flexible because there's a lot of player agency in telling the story, but was there anything that surprised you about kind of what happened or went differently than you expected in interesting ways? Tell me about your experience in the game.
So I have, by virtue of having run and play at a lot of these, in a lot of ways gotten to a place where I don't specifically have any clear idea what's going to happen exactly. I know what's happening in the background. I know what NPCs are doing. I know what the world is doing. But I generally have been successful at, I don't know how we're going to get there, though. And so, for instance, in my head was anything from the potential of when you find out there's the space station, maybe you fly up there with the bioship, maybe you rejigger the portal to get back up there, maybe you go to the watchtower first and launch an assault from there, whatever. Any of these things were possibilities, and so as a result, I wasn't hugely expecting anything there, and that means that attached to that, I get to be surprised and delighted when things line up perfectly so that they fit just this story 100%. And a smaller instance of that is the moment of, oh no, is my brother hurt? Let's check on Gar. And me knowing that at the same time it is McGann's white Martian brother up on the space station, having this perfect moment.
Yeah, that's so I was pretty proud of myself. I was like, oh, maybe it's Gar. We should figure out if Gar's okay. And so I went through that whole thing and tried to do it like behind the scenes, like as if Robin was just doing it because he didn't want to worry him again because she didn't seem to think about it. And then when it came up, and she said like, oh, I'm glad my brother's okay or whatever. Of course, it didn't register to me. At the moment that you revealed, when Emily said, oh, is it my brother? And Robin was surprised. I was surprised. I didn't even know McGann I knew she had siblings, but I didn't know she had a brother specifically that had been referenced in canon. So all of that was a total shock to me. And then when you said, oh yeah, remember that line back earlier when you said, oh, heartbreaking.
The whole of the moment of the reveal of her brother worked incredibly well for me because of this thing of, I knew it was her brother for a while. I knew factually within the fiction that's what was going on. But I didn't know how you were going to figure that out. And so the fact that that moment not only was a revelation of this is her brother, but came from McGann joining hands with Connor and Calder to create this like psychic connection with whatever force was controlling these Aqua matches. And like it made perfect sense. It fit the situation. It was this great moment of you deciding to do something that then led just wonderfully into the revelation of course, on the psychic plane, that would be the moment that you see the brother for the first time in this psychic scene where he wouldn't even recognize her because she doesn't look like what he remembers. That was the part that, for instance, was super exciting for me because this perfect story moment did not come from me having a clear notion in my head of what was coming. It came from a perfect collaboration of everything fitting together, where the actions taken by the PCs created a cinematic moment that let me fill in on my side what happened next and fit the TV show to a T.
I love it. And I love the way that you're presenting that from the GM standpoint. You kind of have to have a through line, a little bit of a through line, a little bit of an anchor. But that little bit of through line or anchor has to be flexible enough to be able to fine tune as you move along. And that's a skill that takes a while that takes practice. That takes rolling a lot of 6 or less to...
a lot of hard moves.
Yeah, exactly. To suss out how that works well. And yeah, you followed it amazingly well. So, any other favorite moments or reveals or things that happened that you maybe were a little surprised about?
I'm trying to think, because there were so many good moments. There was actually, ironically, I think, a good one that came up between Robin and Superboy shortly after the fight with Aquamatch, in which it was revealed that it was Aquamatch. And to me, that was this perfect organic moment where... up until that point, the two of you had sort of been butting heads and had been at odds, and it was building up to what you could imagine was a real shouting match. And then this other thing happened that stole the thunder from that, and suddenly the actual bond of friendship between these two characters came through in that moment perfectly of, I'm going to push that aside and I'm going to express actual support for you right here, right now, because you need it.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, that was all you. And I did not expect that coming at all. And for me, it was super exciting because as a GM, one side of what I get out of this, one side of what I love is getting to sit there and watch my favorite TV show play out. And
yeah,
that means watching these characters be awesome and amazing. And that was a perfect moment of me as GM just sitting back and getting to enjoy these characters, be wonderful, have these moments that feel so right. That was great. I love that.
Yeah. The it's said, and I'm pretty sure it was Robin Law said this, as gamers, we are both, creators and audience at the same time. And that's one of my favorite moments too. I think Robin was walking across the bioship to fill somebody in on the Aqua Lads and or the Aqua Lads, the Aqua matches. Mm-hmm. And I think it's an interesting reflection of the mechanics as well, because the way that it works it was a comfort move, right? Because Robin was like, he knows how much that's going to hurt Superboy, and so he said, all he said was, "I'm sorry."
Yep.
And all Connor said was basically like, "Thank you," or something simple.
Yep.
And the way the move is set up is, does the person offering the comfort believe that the other person has accepted it? Something like that. I can't remember how the phrasing works on that.
It's that they have to open up to you, but you get to be the final judge of whether what they've done is actually opening up.
I like that it's not the game master who does that, first of all, because it keeps the action on the players. But for me, I was like, this is enormous. We've said a total of 4 words between the two of us in this conversation,
and that's all it took.
But it's just a monstrous mountain that we've crossed, which I thought was really interesting. I have to say that we already talked about McGann's brother. That plot twist blew my mind. But there was another thing that happened, which was the actual reveal of these Aqua matches. Like, I did not see that coming at all. And we're all pinning this Aqua match down, and Connor takes the helmet off. I think it was Connor took the helmet off and that kind of thing, and we all see what's going on. I was so literally shocked by that plot twist and what was happening. I kept thinking as a player, I was like, yeah, if I'm this shocked, Robin's got to be this shocked. He's clearly the weakest one, the weakest link, and holding him down. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just narratively, I'm just like, no, Robin loses it. Like, this Aqua match can sense that arm isn't as pinned or whatever, and then punches Superboy in the face. It was so satisfying from an emotional standpoint. And then really, again, putting emphasis on these mechanics, knowing that I was already excited about the conversation the characters were going to have afterwards about this. Because there's mechanical involvement, as much mechanical involvement as a combat, really.
Yep.
But I was like, I want to have this conversation. Like, I want to help Connor and to remove conditions, but I want to see how all of these things lead to one another. In addition to the basic moves, there are also each playbook moves that play off of things like teamwork and things like that. So, and I don't know all the playbooks. I haven't memorized them. So I was interested to see if there were other things that would play into it. And it was so interesting to me. Is there anything else that you'd like to add besides the fact that we're going to have you back for maybe a sequel?
Yeah, of course.
Maybe.
Find out what happens next.
Would you run again? Because we would love that.
Well, clearly, there's so much to. I mean, the brain is still out there, and I have time to improve my phony French accent. But that aside,
nice. Is there anything else about the game, the way it ran, the mechanics, or kind of your thought process behind running the game or interacting with the players that you want to offer up?
Yeah, in this specific game, beyond the base level, everybody in the game was awesome. Everybody was super involved, and it helped so much that everybody had a clear concept of their characters by virtue of having all of this material to draw from and having so much love for these characters. Everybody knew not only how to play their own character, but a little bit of what to expect from the other characters, which was great and a huge boon. The kind of thing that you only get over playing multiple sessions of Masks. The one big thing that I would call out, because it's a huge part of Masks, and I did my best to codify it so that you can't create characters who don't do this, but it can still come up, is all of these characters wanted to be part of the team. All of these characters cared about each other. All of these characters were deeply involved with each other. And that came through on every level. Across the board, everybody was always, even when you're angry with each other, it's that anger of like a family, not the anger of people who could quit and then have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah.
That was perfect. It was wonderful from the players. It meant that at every possible moment, everybody's talking to each other all the time, hitting those moves to speak to each other. And it is crucial to the game and so great to just see that ultimately keeping everybody in this tight circle, bouncing off each other over and over and over and over and over. Yeah.
It was. I just realized when you were talking about that too, my other favorite moment was the fact that end scene between me and Calder, between Robin and Calder, where I went from, in the mindset in my head of Robin at the beginning of the game, Robin literally thinking, I think this is it. I think our team is done. Mm-hmm. And that's how I opened the game up. But by the end of the game, it went from not only are we still a team, but it was, I think I'm actually now ready to lead this team. And then talking to Calder about, Nightwing and Flamebird, right? And kind of
Yep.
that start that thumb. It was such like a little thing, but
So good.
as a fan of Dick Grayson, to be able to like, oh my gosh, I think at least I have a headcanon now of how that process worked, and it was so satisfying. And a lot of that was because of how the mechanics push that kind of interaction. So thank you for that.
Thank you. That was such a good game.
Such a good game. All right. So thanks so much for joining us, Brendan. We can't wait to have you back on again. Where can people get in touch with you here on Earth Prime?
Sure. So you can find out more about all of our Magpie Game stuff at magpiegames.com. We have our own Twitter account at Magpie Official, and you can send us an email if you want to know anything more at info@magpiegames.com. And I am generally a little bit of a modern-day Luddite when it comes to social media, and am somewhat removed, but if you want to ping me, at Magpie Official is the right way to do that. That's perfect, and I will sometimes post on Google Plus as myself as Brendan Conway.
Oh, perfect. And thanks to everyone else for sharing time with us and for hopefully enjoying this actual play podcast. You can find us on Twitter at the YJ Files, on Facebook at www.facebook.com/crashingthemode, on our website, www.crashingthemode.com, and now on Tumblr as well at theyjfiles.tumblr.com, I believe. Hopefully that's right. Emily will correct me. If you want more Young Justice, of course, the fastest way to get it is 1, hashtag buy YJ Comics on Comixology, but 2, tell your own stories and get some masks on your table to play your own stories. If you enjoyed our show, please consider sharing it with a friend. Of course, you can also support by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or the podcatcher of your choice. If you'd like to support our show and getting more reviews, discussions, interviews, and more actual play podcasts from masks and other role-playing games, please consider linking over to patreon.com/crashingthemode, pledging a few dollars a month. As a thank you, we're offering a lot of behind-the-scenes work, and in addition to that, at certain levels, you can also get your own free copy of Masks from Magpie Games, thanks to our friends at Magpie. In addition to that, the characters that Brandon created are now up in the folder for those people who would like to play themselves. And as he mentioned, you can get the basic moves and the playbooks for free already right now. You can also join at levels that give you the opportunity to play in a quarterly superhero-inspired RPG session run by us, just like this one. And even though Season 3 has been officially announced, please continue to spread the word about the series. Hashtag keep binging YJ. Hashtag buy YJ Comics on Comixology. Hashtag give lots of love to Brendan for this amazing game he created. And as always,
stay whelmed, everyone.
You've been listening to Whelmed, the Young Justice Files podcast. Our hosts are Rich Howard and Emily Booza. Our editor and producer is Neil Powell. Our theme was composed by Emily Mio. Our logo was created by Kevin Bates. Whelmed is a fan-made podcast and is not officially affiliated with DC Comics, DC Entertainment, Warner Brothers Animation, and any other owners of Young Justice or its related source material. As such, these companies have sole ownership of all symbols, images, names, logos, and proprietary material related to Young Justice. Original content of this podcast is ours under Creative Commons. Thanks for listening, and stay whelmed.